I knew something was off when the CEO handed me the Operational Excellence Award with all the enthusiasm of a man shaking hands at his own funeral. Everyone clapped, but it was that kind of forced applause you give when someone's kid plays a recorder solo at a talent show. Polite, hollow. Even the engraving on the glass plaque was spelled wrong. Susan H. Lane for keeping us legalish. I almost laughed. Almost 6 years. 6 years of covering their asses. Of catching filing errors before they turned into subpoenas. Of decoding federal compliance clauses in the middle of the night while everyone else was too busy polishing their LinkedIn bios to notice the firewall was down. I kept Crestfield systems from burning to the ground more times than I could count, and this was my thank you. A typo on a cheap trophy and a seat next to the DJ's speaker, while the VP's wife clinked rosé glasses with the marketing interns. Look, before we get too deep into this disaster spiral, let me ask you a quick favor. If you're enjoying the story so far, hit that like button and subscribe. I know, everyone says it. But trust me, 90% of you are listening like it's a podcast from the shadows. And those little clicks really keep this storytelling train moving. Plus, you don't want to miss what happens when a compliance officer snaps without ever raising her voice. Anyway, back to the slow-motion train wreck. This lodge retreat was supposed to be a celebration of internal heroes. Their words, not mine. I was invited, of course, like always, but no one ever asked me to help plan it. Which was ironic, since every time they screwed up the logistics, they came running to me to fix it. I found the missing invoices. I made sure the alcohol policy matched our corporate insurance. I even corrected the hotel's ADA documentation because HR didn't notice half the lodge wasn't wheelchair accessible. But I wasn't a face. I wasn't the shiny new app they were demoing or the analytics VP who talked like he was auditioning for Shark Tank. I was the lady with the corner desk near legal who carried a 3-inch thick binder everywhere and always had a spare printer cartridge in her purse. The kind of woman who got work done while the others scheduled brainstorming sessions to discuss doing work. Still, I showed up. I smiled. I even wore the navy blue dress that didn't make me look like I moonlighted at the DMV. When the awards ceremony kicked off that night, I sipped my club soda with lime and tuned out the parade of buzzwords echoing off the log cabin walls. Innovator of the Year, Client Whisperer, Synergy Strategist. Christ, then came my name. The room dimmed, a spotlight flickered on. The CEO stepped up with a laminated note card and read from it like it physically hurt him to speak. This next award goes to someone who keeps the gears turning behind the scenes, he began. I tuned out again. I've heard the same speech recycled for years. Something about being the backbone, the unsung hero, the quiet force. They praise you with metaphors that sound noble until you realize what they really mean is we forget she exists until something breaks. Still, I stood to accept the glass plaque with a half smile and a nod. That's when she grabbed the mic. Chelsea, the VP's wife. Blonde, brittle, and botoxed within an inch of her personality. She wasn't even on the schedule, but she marched up in her sequin jumpsuit like she was auditioning for Real Housewives. Compliance Edition yanked the mic from the CEO and smiled wide enough to show her veneers. Let's give it up for Susan, everyone, she trilled. And let's all remember to pack our awards before heading out because she paused for dramatic effect, then let the words drop like a guillotine. You're done. The clapping stopped. I mean, it stopped. Like someone hit the mute button on the universe. A glass fell somewhere near the back. The CEO blinked. The VP gave a half smirk like a guy watching someone else get pantsed on a Zoom call. HR's face went into full blue screen error, and I just stood there, holding a plaque that didn't even spell my name right. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what she meant or how she knew something I didn't. I just nodded once, turned around, walked out of the lodge, and drove back down the mountain through the sleet in complete silence. No one followed. No one called, not even legal. You'd think someone would have asked, hey, should we maybe check if the compliance officer was just publicly fired by a woman who doesn't even work here? But nope, because Susan Lane was always quiet, always calm, always the fixer, until the moment they decided I wasn't worth fixing for. That was Friday night. And by Monday morning, the auditor would be asking who the hell let a wine-drunk influencer announce the illegal termination of the only person keeping their multi-million-dollar contracts from imploding. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The sound that came out of the mic wasn't even a full sentence, it was a blade. Pack your awards, Chelsea cooed, you're done. And just like that, a 6-year career collapsed under the weight of a sentence delivered between flute sips of Versailles and the click of her Laubautin knockoffs on polished wood. I froze, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. This wasn't a drunken joke. This wasn't an awkward inside bit that missed the mark. This was an execution wrapped in cocktail glitter. The room went silent in stages. First the interns, then marketing, then the operations team. HR was still trying to smile through it, until I turned and placed the award gently back on the table. Let's talk about the look on the CEO's face. He was 3 Chardonnays into the evening and suddenly remembered he'd left his spine in the lodge's ski closet. He glanced at me, then his shoes, then made a face like he was mentally rewriting the weekend's press release. The VP, Chelsea's husband, leaned back in his chair like he was watching a YouTube prank video, amused, slightly uncomfortable, but not moved enough to do a damn thing. Chelsea kept her eyes on me like she expected applause, like this was her moment. And in a way, maybe it was. She'd been slinking around Crestfield events for years, using her husband's title like a hall pass to every boardroom-adjacent social circle. Her background? Event planning. In Scottsdale, that's it. No legal certification. No regulatory training. No reason to be holding a microphone in a room where federal compliance was even vaguely a topic of interest. But there she was, holding court like a peroxide-wrapped Trojan horse. I scanned the crowd one last time. Not a single person stood. Not a single executive said, hey, maybe don't do this right now. Even the general counsel, man I once coached through a deposition prep with the patience of a hospice nurse, sipped his drink and avoided my gaze, so I left. No door slam, no dramatic exit speech. I didn't grab my things or even finish the Pellegrino I'd been sipping. I simply turned, walked out of the main lodge, down the icy wooden steps, and made my way to the guest cabin where I'd left my overnight bag. Packed up my toiletries, folded my blazer, left the name badge on the pillow like a resignation letter written in fabric and silence. By the time I hit the highway, snow had started to drift across the windshield like static on a dying TV channel. My hands didn't shake, my throat didn't clench, but my foot pressed a little harder on the gas with each mile. It's a strange thing, realizing you've been erased in real time, especially by someone who isn't even on payroll. On the drive home, I went through the mental checklist of every possible reason. Was this some back-channel vendetta? Did I step on the wrong toes in a quarterly review? Did Chelsea find out I blocked her executive influencer brunch from being billed to the corporate card last month? I'd buried that expense so quietly, I figured she wouldn't even notice. But maybe that was the trigger. Or maybe she just didn't like that I existed in a space she couldn't control. But here's the real kicker. She didn't even know what my job meant. She didn't understand that the title compliance officer wasn't just something printed on a business card to make my inbox feel important. She didn't know that the only reason Crestfield could legally close deals with healthcare clients, receive federal funding, or pass annual inspections was because my active certification acted like a seal of approval. A living, breathing legal firewall. And now, as far as the room was concerned, I was done. At home, I didn't even take off my coat. I sat on the edge of the couch, badge still clipped to my hip, and stared at the empty TV screen. My inbox pinged once, then nothing. Not HR, not legal. Not even a Slack message from Dan in procurement asking if I was okay. And Dan once sent me a get well card when I sneezed twice in a row on a Zoom call. Around 1:14 a.m., I logged into the Crestfield internal portal, watched the compliance dashboard load. My credentials were still active. I could still see all the filings, still had clearance for encrypted documents. And then, one by one, access started vanishing. Tabs grayed out, folders locked. My name flickered off the personnel directory. The final nail, my certificate of authority, issued by the Federal Regulatory Licensing Board, was still live. But the platform where it needed to be linked to Crestfield's operational profile? Locked. I whispered to no one that was fast. Then I closed the laptop. And that's when it started to sting. Not rage, not even betrayal, just shame. The kind that settles into your lungs like dust in a forgotten room. They didn't just fire me. They ghosted the one person keeping their empire legally glued together. And tomorrow, the glue was going to crack. Saturday morning rolled in like a hangover I hadn't earned. I sat by the window in my faded college sweatshirt, waiting for the world to catch up to what had just happened. No ping from Outlook. No Teams message. Not even a hey, just checking in from HR. I refreshed my inbox like a woman checking lotto numbers she already knew were wrong. Nothing. I told myself, give it time. Maybe they were stunned. Maybe they thought I needed space. Maybe someone was drafting the world's most awkward apology. But by lunchtime, when the only notification I'd gotten was a Walgreens coupon for foot cream, I started to get that creeping itch behind the eyes they weren't going to call, so I called them. The HR generalist answered on the third ring. Katie, bright, polite, practically fetal. Oh, hi, Susan. We thought you, well, we were told you resigned. Told by who? I asked evenly. A pause. Shuffling papers, maybe? Or just stalling to avoid saying Chelsea? Well, the VP communicated that you had stepped down voluntarily. That's what we have in the notes from the retreat. I'm so sorry no one got in touch. It's just been a lot this weekend with the event wrap-up, and I hung up before she finished the sentence. Voluntarily resigned. That's how they'd written it down. Not fired in a social ambush by someone with zero official authority. Not compliance officer dismissed in front of 200 witnesses by a woman who once confused HIPAA with HIPAA filters on TikTok. Just resigned. I opened my laptop, logged into the Crestfield portal, and sat back as the dashboard flickered to life. Everything was still there for now. 6 years of casework, records, audits, policy drafts. My digital fingerprints were on every compliance file in the system. I watched the loading bar crawl across the screen like a slow bleed. Then I started the process myself. Step 1, back up my certification record. Step 2, save a timestamped PDF of my last active login. Step 3, retrieve copies of all signed filings I'd overseen in the last 30 days, not because I needed them, but because I knew they would. Step 4, I logged out. And right before I did, something changed. The access badges. Tab labeled authorization. Internal roles locked. The folder for compliance signatures gone. My name had been scrubbed from the authorized signatory list. I stared at the blank field where my title used to be and whispered, that was fast. It felt like watching my own obituary be written by someone who only knew me from the holiday potluck sign-up sheet. And yet, there it was. Crestfield Systems, now operating without an active compliance officer. As if that position could just be left vacant. Like a barista no-showing their shift. By Sunday morning, my access to the secure legal repository was gone too, so I did the only thing that made sense. I called Diane. Diane Whitaker had been my mentor back when I first joined Crestfield. She was the head of compliance before me, before retirement became more appealing than babysitting executives who thought regulatory filings were optional reading. She picked up on the first ring. Tell me you're calling from a beach in Aruba. I just got publicly canned by Chelsea during the lodge retreat. Long pause, then Jesus Christ. Are they aware your certification is what ties them to their licensure? I think they were more focused on the cheese board. Diane let out a long, slow exhale. Come by tomorrow, bring the documents. We didn't talk much after that. She didn't offer condolences or platitudes. She knew better. Because what had happened to me wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate maneuver. A chess piece moved by someone who didn't even know the rules of the game, but still managed to knock over the queen and declare victory. Monday would come. And when it did, someone at Crestfield would wake up and realize that their shiny new compliance light operation wasn't legal. That without an active officer registered through the federal certification platform, they couldn't validate filings, couldn't renew partner contracts, couldn't even submit their quarterly compliance logs without triggering an alert. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Not until they made it my problem again. I placed my Crestfield badge on the kitchen table and slid it under a half-empty coffee mug. Let it sit there like a relic, like a cautionary tale. They thought they could erase me with a single microphone and a snide smile. What they forgot. You don't fire the foundation and expect the building to stand. By Monday morning, I had become a ghost in my own legacy. No email, no voicemail, not even a passive-aggressive LinkedIn message from anyone at Crestfield. You'd think someone would have noticed the sudden absence of the person who personally validated every federal compliance report since 2017. But no, 2 days of silence. Not even the automated HR system noticed I'd stopped clocking in. The silence, though, it was louder than any shouting match. That's when I realized they didn't just want me gone, they wanted me forgotten. Meanwhile, Crestfield scrambled. Quarter-end filings were due by Wednesday. Federal oversight required that any compliance submission carry the active credential number of a currently licensed officer. Problem was, no one realized that mine wasn't just a line item in the system, it was the line item. They'd built every procedural pipeline around my license. All documentation flowed through it. Without it, every signature they stamped in the past 48 hours might as well have been drawn in crayon. But ignorance makes a hell of a cologne. The VP, Bradley, was riding high. The man had the emotional depth of a conference badge and the strategic vision of a wet napkin, but he was still taking his little victory lap. He posted a blurry selfie on LinkedIn from the retreat, captioned, "Leadership is about making hard calls. Proud to support bold transitions. #growth #team Crestfield. Bold transitions? You had your wife fire me during happy hour between her third glass of wine and a plate of artisan sliders. Let's not pretend you're a wartime general." Chelsea, bless her surgically perfect eyebrows, wasn't far behind. She'd posted a carousel of Instagram stories with background music from some top 40 anthem about success. One shot showed her toasting champagne by the fireplace with the caption, "Here's to knowing your worth." #leadership family #making moves #by Susan. She tagged Crestfield's corporate account. I didn't comment. I didn't report it. I just screenshot every frame and saved them to a folder called exhibits. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was calculating. There's a difference. That afternoon, I grabbed my envelope, my binder, and a pair of gloves and drove to Diane's. Diane lived 30 minutes outside the city, in a bungalow with creaky wood floors and a porch that still had a faded campaign sign from 3 elections ago leaning behind a fern. When she opened the door, she didn't ask how I was. She didn't need to. We sat in her kitchen, surrounded by the smell of percolating coffee and lemon-scented furniture polish. No corporate branding, no fake executive smiles. Just wood grain, real sugar cubes, and a woman who knew exactly what kind of storm was coming. "Let me guess," she said, pouring me a mug. "They haven't figured it out yet." Nope. She took a sip. "Then it's going to be fun." We talked shop for about an hour. She asked questions, nodded, muttered a few well-placed curse words, then grew quiet. At one point, she opened a file drawer and pulled out an old FRCB handbook from the year she got certified. She handed it to me with a smile. "In case you want to remind them how rules work." Before I left, I slid the sealed envelope across her dining table. "What's this?" she asked. "Just something to be delivered if I don't get a call by Wednesday morning." She looked at me for a long moment, then tucked the envelope beneath her placemat like it was a hand grenade she'd agreed to babysit. "I take it this isn't a resignation letter," she said. "No," I said. "It's a map to every mine they buried under their own feet." As I drove away, the fog rolled in off the freeway like a curtain dropping on Act 1. I didn't feel righteous. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready, because it was never about ego. It wasn't about wanting a round of applause or a corporate fruit basket. It was about the fact that they thought I was disposable. And now they were about to learn that removing the compliance officer wasn't just a bad idea, it was an illegal one. And in the eyes of the federal government, ignorance wasn't going to save them. It was going to bury them. Monday, 8:37 a.m. It began with a ping. Crestfield's general counsel, Alan Drucker, man whose idea of crisis management involved recycled metaphors and oat milk, opened his inbox to find the subject line that would curdle his oat latte before he could stir in the cinnamon. Subject: urgent missing active certification on recent filings. The sender: Marion Choi, senior regulatory auditor with the Federal Oversight Bureau. Not someone you ignored. Not someone who sent emails for fun. Alan clicked it, linking hard like maybe the subject line would soften if he stared long enough. It didn't. The body of the message was worse. We've reviewed last week's EOD compliance submissions. As of 5:42 p.m. Friday, no active credential is listed for your internal compliance officer on FRCB record. Please clarify the signatory's status immediately. Translation: you filed legal documents without a licensed officer. That's not a slap on the wrist. That's federal fine plus six-figure damage control, plus good luck explaining that to your board. Bad. By 9:12 a.m., Drucker was on a call with the internal legal team. By 9:47 a.m., someone from HR was screaming into a Slack thread labeled Fire Emergency Cert Issue Fire, and no one knew who still had Susan's system login or whether her signature had been auto-populated by mistake. And by 10:04 a.m., every exec who had pretended not to see me leave the lodge 2 nights earlier received the same invite. Calendar invite. Emergency certification review mandatory attendance location. Executive boardroom, 12th floor time, 10:30 a.m. sharp. Host: Alan Drucker required. CEO, COO, CFO, VP Operations, VP Legal, Brad Talbot, VP, Strategic Growth, HR Director, and somewhere in the Talbot household. While he poured cold brew into a monogram tumbler, Brad, my former boss, told his wife, "Relax, it's probably just a checkbox." Alan's always freaking out about something. Chelsea didn't even look up from her phone. She was posting a filtered selfie from the retreat with the caption, "Still glowing from the weekend." Leadership isn't about titles, it's about courage. Flex sparkles #wife goals moving forward. Back in the office, Drucker prepped the boardroom like he was hosting a hostage negotiation. He printed out the email, highlighted every word in neon yellow, and projected it on the flat screen behind the conference table. Below that, he pulled up the federal compliance portal and refreshed the company's current certification status. And there it was, big, bold, in all caps. Active license holder. None on file. The words hit like a gunshot in a bank lobby. It had been exactly 49 hours since my name vanished from the registry. Not transferred, not replaced, just void. And in federal regulation land, that's like trying to fly a commercial jet with an expired pilot's license and an open bottle of bourbon in the cockpit. Every deal signed, every disclosure filed, every audit preclearance form processed in that window, invalid, unenforceable, litigation bait. Drucker stared at the screen like he could will it into reversing itself. "What the hell is going on?" the CEO asked. I think Drucker started, then stopped. He picked up his binder, flipped to the page with the timestamp from Friday evening, then back to the FRCB screen. Brad sauntered in at 10:25 a.m., still chewing the crust of a breakfast bar. "So, is this about the badge stuff? Because if it's Susan again," Alan turned slowly, face pale. She was the only credentialed officer. Her name was linked to every operational filing. Brad shrugged. "Can't we just have someone else sign the stuff?" "You can't backdate federal compliance," Alan said. "This isn't a PTO request." The CEO pinched the bridge of his nose. "Who signed the weekend submissions?" Everyone looked at each other. Then someone whispered, Did the system use her auto-sig?" The screen flashed as Alan clicked into one of the weekend filings. There it was. My digital signature. Timestamped. Unbacked by certification. A ghost signature. A loaded gun with no fingerprint except theirs. Brad's face began to shift. Slowly, the cocky, glassy veneer faded. He looked, not scared exactly, but like someone realizing the party he just hosted might have set the building on fire. "What's the worst-case scenario?" he muttered. Alan didn't answer. He just turned back to the screen and pointed at one word Marion Choi had underlined in her email. Sanctions. The room fell silent. Across town, I was finishing a crossword in Diane's kitchen. The envelope still sat under her placemat, untouched. We were on our second pot of coffee. "Think they've figured it out yet?" she asked. I smiled, folded the paper, and said the calendar invite went out at 10:04. She poured another cup, so that's a yes. And somewhere on Crestfield's server, the clock kept ticking, 49 hours and counting. By 10:32 a.m., the air in the Crestfield executive boardroom had gone from tense to funereal. The only sound was the low hum of the ceiling vent and the occasional nervous shuffle of expensive shoes under the table. Enter, Marion Choi. She didn't knock, didn't need to. Regulatory auditors don't need your permission to walk into the room, they are the permission. And today, she came with a binder. Not a laptop, not a tablet, a physical binder, thick as a Bible and twice as damning. She wore a gray blazer like it was armor and set the binder on the table like it weighed more than the building's reputation. No one offered her coffee. Thank you for making time, she said, calm as a surgeon prepping for a triple bypass. This won't take long, depending on your answers. No one spoke. The CEO nodded. Barely. She flipped open the binder to a tab marked Cert 214.1 and read aloud. As of Friday, 5:42 p.m., Crestfield Systems operated without an actively licensed compliance officer on file, while simultaneously submitting 4 separate federal disclosures. Per Federal Code 214.1, any documentation signed by an uncredentialed individual during this lapse may be considered void. She paused, not for drama, just long enough to let the weight of void settle in. Alan Drucker, general counsel, looked like someone had poured ice water down his shirt. The CFO was already flipping through notes, whispering to himself and highlighting numbers that didn't matter anymore. The CEO stared at a smudge on the table like it might contain the answer to this catastrophe. Then Marion closed the binder halfway and asked, point blank, who authorized the termination of your only licensed compliance officer? You could have heard a pin drop in the HR department 5 floors below. Brad shifted in his seat, slowly, like maybe if he moved just right, he'd become invisible. His tie was loose, collar wrinkled. He looked like a man who got dressed in the dark and realized too late he was walking into his own funeral. The CEO cleared his throat. There may have been a miscommunication, he said slowly, like each word was being yanked out of his mouth with dental floss. Marion waited. Brad finally spoke. There was an incident at the retreat. My wife, Chelsea, she made a statement, publicly, about Susan stepping down. Your wife? Marion's tone didn't change, but the volume of judgment in those 2 syllables could have flattened a lesser man. She was under the impression Susan had already submitted notice, Brad stammered. I think she was just trying to formalize it. The way she phrased it may have been misinterpreted. Marion blinked. Once. So just to clarify, she said slowly, the only person authorized to file compliance paperwork on behalf of Crestfield Systems was removed from her role via impromptu speech by someone not employed by the company during a social event without formal documentation or HR verification. Brad said nothing. His throat worked like he was trying to swallow sand. Alan tried to recover. It was never meant to be official. Her access was terminated by IT, but we were under the impression it was voluntary. Voluntary resignations, Marion said flatly, require a letter, or at minimum, confirmation from HR. Do you have either? No one answered. She turned the binder to face them and flipped to a timestamped screenshot from the federal licensing portal. My name, the timestamp. Red letters, certificate revoked inactive status. And yet she continued, documents were still filed under her name as recently as 10:02 p.m. Sunday. Signatures auto-applied. That constitutes misrepresentation under federal code. At minimum, this will trigger a hold on all pending approvals. At worst, litigation for fraud, misfiling, and lack of oversight. The room sagged. The COO rubbed his temples like he could press the problem out of existence. HR muttered something about looking into records. The CEO glanced at Brad with the kind of expression you reserve for someone who just set your yacht on fire to impress their mistress. Marion closed the binder. The thunk echoed like a gunshot. My office will begin review immediately. Expect follow-up notices by close of business. In the meantime, she let the silence drag for effect. You'll want to inform your stakeholders that all pending deals are frozen. She stood and paused, hand on the doorknob. And I suggest someone reach out to Miss Lane. Immediately. Brad's voice cracked. She didn't answer our call. She doesn't have to, Marion replied. You fired the foundation of your compliance architecture with no redundancy. She's not the problem anymore. You are. She left. No one moved. No one breathed. Outside, the Crestfield logo flickered on the digital screen in the lobby. Integrity, precision, trust, in the boardroom. The only thing flickering was Brad's future. The call came at 2:11 p.m., not from HR, not from legal, not even from Brad, who I assumed was currently locked in a supply closet breathing into a branded Crestfield paper bag. It was the COO, Margaret Delaney, a woman who had once described compliance as that stuff that happens in the background so we don't get sued. Her tone on this particular Monday? Polished panic, dressed up in fake warmth. Susan, hi, gosh, I was hoping we could connect sooner. Listen, we'd love to talk about bringing you back in, maybe in a short-term consulting capacity. Just to help us through this little wrinkle. Little wrinkle? They were hemorrhaging legality and calling it a crease. I let the silence drag. She rushed to fill it. Just until we, recalibrate some workflows and restore confidence with the auditors. We know how much value you brought to the org. Honestly, no one's more respected in compliance than you. Is that what Chelsea said before or after she fired me over the charcuterie board? She chuckled nervously. There was clearly a miscommunication there. Sure, I said, voice level. Because usually when someone says you're done into a microphone in front of 200 people, they mean we appreciate you. Margaret hesitated. Well, the real issue is operational continuity. We just need someone with your knowledge base too. Not someone, me, I cut in. You need me, not a consultant, not a warm body. You need Susan Lane, certified compliance officer, to glue your filings back together before the auditor recommends criminal referrals. Another silence. Then she softened. Of course, of course. But just logistically, given the situation, we're looking to engage you as a 1099 consultant. Independent, flexible schedule, premium hourly. That's funny, I said, tilting my head at the absurdity of it all, though she couldn't see. I used to be an officer. Now you want me temporary. Margaret shifted gears. Look, Susan, we just want to make this right. A full return might take time, red tape, board approval, but we can bring you on immediately under this structure. We'll make sure you're compensated generously. Define generously. She quoted a number. It was higher than my salary, yes, but still short of what it would cost them to survive the next 3 weeks without me. I'll consider it, I said. There was an audible blink on the other end. You'll consider it? I need to discuss with my attorney and my accountant, and my schedule's suddenly quite full. Susan, this is time sensitive. Every hour counts. I know, tick-tock. I hung up before she could say anything else. Across the kitchen table, Diane raised an eyebrow over the rim of her coffee mug. That sounded fun. They want me back? Of course they do. They just watched their entire legal foundation collapse like a Jenga tower in a wind tunnel. They want me on a contract because it's easier to screw over a consultant than reinstate an officer. I nodded, reached for my phone, and opened my notes. Titled the file, Terms. Then I started writing. No NDA, no non-compete. Full back pay retroactive to Friday. Authority restored. Reporting lines straight to the chairman. The new title, Chief Ethics Officer. Let them come to me. Let them sweat. Let them see what it costs to rebuild a house after you fire the architect mid-blueprint. Because the funny thing about me, I didn't scream, I didn't rant. I didn't fight back at the lodge, and that scared them more than if I had. I didn't need to fight, I just needed to wait. And now, they were the ones panicking into a microphone. By Tuesday morning, the silence broke, not with an announcement, but with a leak. Someone, probably one of the interns who'd been live-snapping their entire corporate bonding experience, had captured the exact moment Chelsea Talbot took the mic and publicly fired me like she was announcing dessert. The video wasn't long, just 10 seconds, enough to show her raising her glass, that frozen sorority smile, and the fatal line, "Let's give it up for Susan. And remember to pack your awards because you're done." She even winked. The clip hit Slack first, then WhatsApp, then Discord, where a few of the engineers had a private channel called Crestfail. It spread faster than any internal memo ever had. Within hours, even the PR director, Janice, who had once warned me not to wear gray because it washed out our brand palette, was in full containment mode. First, the photo galleries disappeared. All official photos from the retreat vanished from the company intranet with the subtlety of a CIA document purge. No more smiling faces in front of the lodge fireplace. No more team synergy shots on the frozen lake dock. The entire folder? Deleted, replaced by a placeholder that read under maintenance. Thank you for your patience. Then, Chelsea's badge stopped working. Apparently, she tried to drop off lunch for Brad and got locked out of the executive elevator. She called facilities. They forwarded her to HR. HR put her on hold. By lunchtime, Brad himself was told to work remotely until further notice. Rumor had it the chairman asked him to provide a written explanation for the incident twice. Neither version mentioned his wife's Instagram posts, but screenshots told a different story. Especially the one where she tagged the company with #by Susan. HR flagged that one immediately. But the damage wasn't just internal. A mid-level partner from an external compliance firm forwarded the video to a contact at the Federal Oversight Bureau. Marion Choi, the auditor from Monday, got the clip by 3:20 p.m. She responded with a single sentence, CCing Crestfield Legal. Please confirm, is this an official termination announcement? Alan Drucker, Crestfield's counsel, tried to reply with legalese so dry it could absorb oil spills. Marion followed up with, we'll proceed accordingly. And just like that, any hope of brushing this off as a misunderstanding got body slammed by the weight of documentation and digital receipts. Meanwhile, I sat on my porch sipping ginger tea and watching the headlines roll in on my industry feeds. One blog wrote, Crestfield compliance officer ousted during retreat toast federal audit triggered. The comments were brutal. Someone posted a gif of a dumpster fire sliding down an icy hill. Another wrote, imagine building your career and getting canned by a real housewife at a ski lodge. I didn't respond. But I did forward the article to Diane with the note, told you they'd implode without me. Then I composed an email, short, clean, surgical, to legal@crestfield.com, subject, potential engagement, body. I'm willing to consider a meeting to discuss terms of re-engagement. Please note my attorney will attend. I am unavailable for calls until Thursday afternoon. Documentation may be sent to my legal representative for review in advance. Susan H. Lane. I hit send and closed the laptop. I didn't smile, not exactly. But I did exhale for the first time in 4 days, because it wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about watching the same people who once called me support staff realize they'd built an empire on my backbone, and then acted surprised when the whole damn thing collapsed the moment I walked away. And now they were scrubbing photos and praying no more receipts surfaced. Spoiler, they would. Thursday, 3 o'clock p.m. I arrived at Crestfield HQ through the side entrance, not because I was trying to avoid attention, but because they asked me to. Apparently, PR thought it would be less disruptive. I thought that was adorable, like the ship could sink more quietly if we all wore slippers. The receptionist stood as I stepped off the elevator. They're expecting you, Miss Lane. Miss Lane, not Sue. Not hey, compliance lady. Not even the one snarled is she even revenue generating from Brad. The halls were hushed, polished, artificial calm stretched over panic like febres on a rotting rug. I passed familiar faces, most of whom looked down at their keyboards the second they saw me, like I might turn them into legal mulch on sight. No one smiled. No one joked, not this time. Two security escorts walked me to the boardroom, not because they thought I'd cause a scene, but because, technically, I was no longer cleared for unescorted access. They said it like I might be offended. I wasn't. I liked the drama of it. Let them wonder if I was returning or reclaiming. Inside, the boardroom was full. CEO, CFO, General Counsel, Brad, HR, Investor Relations, even one of the outside directors. They were all there, and at the head of the table, Marion Choi. Her binder was open, tabs neatly aligned like a roadmap to hell. Let's begin, she said, and the room settled into a grim silence. She didn't waste time, didn't give them a chance to reframe. She turned directly to the page, flagged 214.1 breach active oversight requirement. In accordance with federal statute, she began, Crestfield Systems operated without valid compliance oversight for a documented duration of 49 hours, beginning at 5:42 p.m. Friday and concluding at 6:39 p.m. Sunday. During this time, 4 federal documents were submitted under a credential no longer associated with any registered officer. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The words themselves rang like steel on tile. She turned to Alan Drucker. Counselor, can you confirm whether any other certified officer was available or assigned during that window? Alan's lips moved. No sound came out. Finally, he shook his head. No. Marion clicked her pen once, wrote something. Then she looked at Brad. Mr. Talbot, would you like to explain the circumstances surrounding the removal of Miss Lane from her position? Brad opened his mouth like he had something prepared, probably rehearsed in the mirror or dictated into his phone. But whatever speech he thought would save him caught in his throat. He looked down, then at his hands, then at his wife's empty chair, and said nothing. Marion nodded once. The CEO leaned forward, voice low and hoarse. We can't afford this. His hands were trembling slightly, just enough to be noticed. Just enough to confirm what they'd all realized: this wasn't a mess. This was a breach. Then finally I spoke. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I just let it cut. You're asking the wrong question, I said. They turned to look at me. The woman who'd built their compliance infrastructure. The woman who kept her head down, her documentation tight, her filings spotless. Woman they let get erased by a social climber with Wi-Fi. It's not about who terminated me, I continued. It's about why no one stopped her. Silence. I could feel it wash through them, that creeping realization that it wasn't a slip. It wasn't a rogue decision. It was a collective failure of nerve, of ethics, of leadership. Alan cleared his throat. Miss Lane, don't, I said. You had your chance to speak Monday. Now you'll wait. More silence. Then Marion closed her binder, slid a single sheet of paper across the table, and stood. This report will be submitted to the Federal Oversight Bureau. Crestfield will be placed on conditional status until further remediation is complete. She turned to me, handed over a second copy of the report. Remedial compliance oversight reinstated under new officer, Susan H. Lane, not consultant, not temp, officer. She left the room, no handshakes, no smiles, no fake apologies, just the door swinging shut behind her. I gathered my folder, stood, and paused. Next time you build a house, I said, voice calm, try asking the foundation before you tear it out for Instagram likes. Then I walked out. The silence behind me, that was the sound of power shifting. And this time, it was mine. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.